Hello everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website, roll20.net. With this video, I'll be reviewing The Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, designed by Wizards of the Coast and adapted to Roll20. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to my platinum patrons Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, and Chris, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcos David Vicente, Gilberto, Sean A.K., Cert 2B, Adam, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Rosh, and Limpy Spuds. Thank you all very much for your support. Now, I have to say this first and foremost. I am not familiar with Critical Role. I'm familiar with Critical Role. I do not keep up with Critical Role. I have watched random episodes here and there. I've really enjoyed the ones that I've watched, but just for whatever reason, I haven't been able to really jump in and actually lock in and watch everything. What I do know is that Wildemount is specifically the setting of their second campaign, which I really like it when these shows do multiple campaigns. They start new characters and get a chance to have players play as different characters and explore different stories and all that. So I think that's really cool. And if I were to jump in, I would definitely jump in with I guess they're calling it season 2, maybe, which takes place in Wildemount, which is pretty cool that I believe Matthew Mercer was designing this one at the time that they were running their first campaign. This takes place in the same fantasy world, which is kind of built alongside, it's like a Forgotten Realms style, rife with D&D adventure, but takes place on a different continent, which is Wildemount. So this is a source book along the same vein as like Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica and the Eberron Rising from the Last War, which means you're going to get a whole bunch of information on locations. You might get some new races and sub-races, probably some new subclasses, maybe some new backgrounds, everything that's specifically do with this region, which I'm going to go ahead and switch to the map because it's a pretty cool map. Out of all of these source books that Roll20 has done, one of my biggest problems, here's the continent, is how useful is that to have in Roll20? Because to me, what I want in a Roll20 published adventure book is the adventure. I want the campaign. I want all the maps in place. I want all the tokens. I want the dynamic lighting. That's the kind of stuff that's going to help me the most as someone who plays all of their D&D stuff via Roll20, whereas source book stuff, a lot of times it's easier just to have the physical book, be able to crack that open and pull out whatever information I need. Now, that being said, I really, really do like Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. In fact, out of all the different source books I've reviewed, this may actually be my favorite one, despite being wholly unfamiliar with it. As I said, I haven't watched any of Season 2's Critical Role stuff. The ones I did watch were back in Season 1, and I know nothing about this world or anything. So I went in blind, and now I can see. It's a really cool region. I like the way that it's organized by basically sectioning off the continent. I can't even get it all on here unless I actually zoom out using Roll20's pretty nice new zoom out tool, which is a lot better than the kind of scroll bar. It's more about in 10% chunks, and that's a lot easier to control. But you can see there's the continent right here, and it's kind of separated into 4 main regions, I believe, which is the Menagerie Coast, Soros, I don't know how to pronounce anything, this eastern kind of wastelands, the middle area of the Dwendalian Empire, and then the graying wildlands to the north. And in fact, it includes 4 mini adventures designed for level 1 PCs as kind of introductions to this region, one for each of those areas. And they do a good job of showcasing what those areas are all about, as well as giving you a variety of things. Some of them are, murder mysteries, and some of them are just you're hanging out with pirates fighting shark people. One of them is like a hex crawl through the jungle. They're all kind of different in terms of theme and not just in terms of the region and the kind of monsters you'll be facing. So, and I thought all 4 of them are fairly well written and interesting too, which is pretty nice. But they are very small in scope. They are designed for level 1. You'll level up to level 2 about halfway through, and then upon completion, you'll reach level 3. And we know if you have any experience playing any kind of D&D stuff, there's not a whole lot you can do at those lowest levels of gameplay. But I'm very positive on this source book in general, probably more so than most source books, just because I really think this is a very interesting region. It is very Forgotten Realms-esque without being the Forgotten Realms, which I think is nice because at this point, as nice as it is to have that kind of commonality with, oh yeah, we know Waterdeep, we know Neverwinter, we know this region. It's we've seen that in so many adventures now over the years. I mean, 5e is basically Forgotten Realms. That it is honestly really refreshing to see an area that is still that same kind of high fantasy world, but has its own specific history. This one has a little bit more maybe Game of Thronesy action going on with some kingdoms that are at war with each other. I even got a little bit of a Pillars of Eternity vibe for this one faction that involves reincarnating your souls and all that. There's and the pirate thing from Pillars 2, which is all over the Menagerie Coast down here. It kind of pulls together a lot of really great bits of fantasy world building that I really enjoy. So I was very impressed with it. All right, let's go over and I will go over the adventures in a second because I think that's what a lot of people are going to want to look at and see how well do these, incorporate into Roll20. And that's really what I'm probably going to focus on more than going over the actual journal stuff because it's not super useful for me doing a Roll20 review in terms of, reading through all these entries. And I'm not quite going to do that, but I will list at least what I like about them. So the following content is included in the $49.95 Explorer's Guide to Wildemount product on Roll20. It includes the Compendium Expansion, the Character Art Pack, and the Adventure Module. So the Compendium Expansion means that it will be integrated into your Compendium no matter which actual campaign you're playing. You'll be able to click on one of these things and drag, for example, the new races. I can't show you on here because my review copy didn't actually include the Compendium because it was an advanced review copy. But for example, any of the new subclasses, like the Echo Knight, I believe is one of them, will appear in the Compendium, and they will be integrated into the character monster as well, which is kind of Roll20's answer to like the D&D Beyond, which is an easy way for you to be able to build and create and update your character sheets. So 4 mini adventures that take place in Wildemount is the adventure modules. Those maps plus having these kind of region maps come to 11 non-gridded region maps, 1 hex grid region map, that's the jungle hex grid I mentioned earlier, 1 100-foot city map, which might as well be just a region map. I don't know why it was designated as a 100-foot scale map, but there you go. 2 10-foot battle maps with 5-foot subdivisions, and 8 5-foot battle maps, all of which have dynamic lighting if you are a Plus or Pro Roll20 subscriber. There's an alphabetized token page that has all of the various tokens in it. It includes 12 races and 10 sub-races, although very few of those are new to Wildemount, but it does include them as kind of a one-stop shop because thankfully you don't need to have you don't really need to have the monster manual or well, I guess you have to have the player's handbook. You should have the player's handbook anyway, but it includes all the races, which is very, very cool. I guess it doesn't have the classes in here. It just has the new subclasses, but all the races, because technically they've got little extra blurbs about where they appear in Wildemount. But for the most part, they're the exact same races as you find in the player's handbook, and I believe Volo's Guide to Monsters, which added the more like the goblins and the kenkus and that kind of thing. Those all exist here too, but there aren't any new races as far as I'm aware. You can make hollow ones, which are like undead versions, but those are treated more as like an additional like buff or charm or whatever that classified as, rather than a full-on race. I think there's a few new sub-races, though, like a certain kind of halfling or elf that are endemic to certain regions, but other than that, no new race. It's all the standard kind of D&D races. 3 new subclasses, 1 for fighters and 2 for wizards. All of this is integrated into the character monster. 2 new backgrounds, 15 new spells from the School of Dunamancy, which as far as I can tell is kind of like the Force and kind of like time magic from like Final Fantasy Tactics, maybe. It's like manipulating the energies of the world, but doing so in like a time and space format. So, and that's what the 2 new wizard subclasses are. One of them is I forgot the name of it. It's like a chrono mage and a gravity mage. And then all the spells have to do with that. Over 50 magic items, including over 40 new items unique to Wildemount. That's pretty cool. Nearly 200 monsters. Now, there's an asterisk there. All of these have drag and drop tokens, stat blocks, and player handouts. It includes, from what I can tell, and I reached out to Roll20 about this, and they seem to confirm that, it includes all the monsters that are in any kind of encounters or that are listed in any way in Wildemount, which means not just the ones found in adventures. They might be, because there's a whole list of locations, and those locations might have encounters, and those random encounters might have, some like in the frozen, or what do they call it, Isocross up here, which is a really cool region that's got like a crashed dome city from the ancient past. One of the encounters is just an ancient white dragon, for example, if you're really high level because it scales, and then one of the monsters included under monsters is an ancient white dragon. That's just included in here. I don't think Roll20 had to do that at all, but they did, because then we can hyperlink whenever it's mentioned in the encounters. You can then hyperlink over to here, and it's already there. So you can just drag and drop all of these tokens. They've already got the stat sheets built in. That is jaw-droppingly cool, and that's a reason why this entire product is way elevated in my mind, because it includes almost all the monsters of the monster manual, from what I can tell. Now, Roll20 still mentioned that this does not include all of the things from the monster manual, and that one is still worth getting. But given that, and the monster manual is cheaper, I will mention, I believe the monster manual is like $29.99, and Wildemount is full priced at $49.95. So that is obviously a big difference. But Wildemount, I mean, if you're going to use the Wildemount content, the fact that you also get most of the monsters in the monster manual is a huge plus. I was really, really impressed with that. Way more so than you would just find in the 4 included adventures, which is usually how these things are. You usually only get the monsters that are in whatever limited adventure is included, and then they want you to buy, obviously, the more content, Mordenkainen's and all that stuff, to get access to those new monsters. So I was very impressed that we get new ones. Now, it's not a complete list by any means, but just scrolling through here, it's damn near close. And I didn't sit here and meticulously count every one of them, but I came up with somewhere between 150 and 200 monsters, which is pretty nuts. In addition, we get over 100 player art handouts. Obviously, a lot of that is just the monster art from, the monster manual. But there are, where did I say that? 40 original art pieces for Wildemount, and the art is very, very awesome, as pretty much all the art is for Wizards of the Coast products. That's never been a complaint of mine, except for the maps. I'm not a fan of the Dice and Logos maps, for those of you that have watched my reviews before, but you'll be pleased to know, or at least I was pleased to know, this is not that map style. This is a different full color map style, which I'm very grateful for. And finally, supplemental rules from the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide, with things like, madness and disease and underwater combat, stuff that is just from those rule books that are included in here for convenience sake, really. So, before I jump into the adventures, obviously we went over the monster sheets, which are amazing. The actual history and culture and everything about Wildemount is really good stuff. It's all listed up here in the Welcome to Wildemount, Story to Wildemount sections. I believe the easiest way, it's not actually divided between chapters, which is interesting. Usually Roll20 kind of literally divides things up. Here's chapter 1 and the introduction, chapter 2, whatever, chapter 3. This one actually gets rid of the whole chapters and just puts them under some major headings and subheadings. I believe if you want to look up the chapters, you will need to go to, let's see if I can find it. Maybe what's in this book, actually. There we go. Okay, so the what's in this book section is a really helpful overview, and that actually tells you, okay, chapter 1 was the history and the gods, which is, I believe, this Welcome to Wildemount and Story of Wildemount section right here, lists all the gods and things. Chapter 3 is faction and societies, which mentions all the different empires, and there's pirate factions, and there's the Kryn dynasty, which is the drow that have emerged. They've got these giant magic dome umbrellas to cover their cities, and they have this reincarnating soul system, which is really cool. All these different factions that take place, all that is chapter 2. Chapter 3 is the Gazetteer, which is the gigantic location extravaganza. So every single location, and if you notice on here, even if I zoom in, this doesn't actually have individual locations on here. Instead, we get multiple region maps which zoom in on each of those 4 major regions. Actually, I think there's a little bit more than that. Menagerie Coast, Morrow Valley, Zemni Fields, Graying Wildlands, Isocrosts, and the Wastes of Shora. So we're talking, actually, Bright Shore, I think, is another one. So we're talking like 6 or 7 of these region maps. So if we just click on one of these, that's what's actually going to take you to a closer look. And that's got the individual, rivers and lakes and cities. And one cool thing, these are all these words that you're seeing are actually on the GM layer, which means when you first show this to your players, they just see a blank map without any writing on it. So that gives you, the DM, the chance to reveal locations. You can either reveal all of them if you want, if your players already should have a full working knowledge of the area, or only reveal areas that are going to be pertinent to your campaign, or you can have them reveal areas as they explore. I'm not going to tell you how to run your game, but it's a really cool thing that Roll20 does, and I've noticed they start doing that with pretty much all of their region maps now, is just put everything on the GM layer just for not for the hell of it, just for the best case scenario, which, because that, as the GM, gives you the option to then decide how much you want to show your players. So I do really like that, and that's really fun. But it's insane how huge this area is. Like, I mean, this right here, let's go to the Menagerie Coast, since that's what I'm looking at for this one. So here's the Menagerie Coast, which includes a huge archipelago. There's a pirate island. There's this nice little, everything's all reefs and coasts and capes and all that. These are all the different locations included just in this one area. And some of these, are kind of medium sized. They might have multiple areas in them. Others are going to be pretty small. Like right here, it's just going to mention like maybe one thing that's happened here, or the thing that region is known for. And others are going to be entire towns, which have their own lists of government, crime, geography, and adventure hooks, which is really cool. So a lot of the areas in the region have their adventure hooks, which you as the DM, which is exactly what I'm looking for when I want a source book, is tell me, okay, here's the history. That's all fun and good, but how does that apply to me making an adventure and a list of adventures right now? And for me, this kind of thing right here is by far the most enjoyable and useful part of all of these locations. Just to give you a sampling of the ones I wrote down, you can help pirates deal with their rogue dragon turtle. You can witness a series of gruesome chest-bursting deaths, which track down to a death slot brothel. You can investigate the murder of a halfling comedy duo at a military outpost. You can participate in a rowdy gnome drag show. You can defend a dwarven city from attacks by purple worms, followed by the enemy Kryn Empire, the drow coming in to attack. You can explore a snow globe-like ancient city frozen in time, and there are giant turtles in the wastelands called horizon-back tortoises that have giant, like the entire Kryn Empire can like build their cities on the back of these. There it is. How cool is that? So really, really fun and imaginative stuff going on. And that was just a sampling of me going through and just jotting down some interesting adventure hooks and tidbits and locations that I really enjoyed. So that's a really, really interesting, fun section. It's incredibly long, but it's really good shit. It honestly is. Even if you're not going to actually adventure in Wildemount, which if you're going to buy this, I would assume you'd want to. But even if you're not, I think there's probably enough content here to just get some good story ideas, frankly. Get some good art and some good content to put in whatever your fantasy world is. You could just take and borrow bits and pieces of it to fill out your own campaign. All right, so let's go over the actual adventures real quick, because I think that's what the majority of people are looking at when we're looking at a Roll20 adventure. So this comes with 4 mini adventures, all of them designed for level 1 PCs. One bummer is that this product does not come with pre-generated characters, which I really like to see with a lot of these source books, to give you kind of an example of what the new characters look like. And I don't know if maybe this one just has less in the way of new character content, because it does use 5e stuff so heavily versus something like a Ravnica or an Eberron. But we don't get any of those pre-generated characters, so sorry. What we do get are the 4 adventures: Tide of Retribution, Dangerous Designs, Frozen Sick, and Unwelcome Spirit. I'll just go over them in that order. Tide of Retributions takes place in the Menagerie Coast. It has a really cool inciting incident where they're on an island, which is attached to the Palma Flora village, I believe, and the entire island suddenly begins. In fact, there's a map for that. The entire island begins sinking as a bunch of Sahuagin swarm up in the island. And what map am I looking for? This one. And attacks all the poor villagers. So you get to be the heroes and go around saving people from, shark attacks and giant crabs and all this. And eventually you clamber aboard a pirate ship as the entire island sinks to the bottom of the sea, which is a really cool start. But and maybe it's a problem with the fact that it's such a short adventure. Basically, the next part of the adventure is you fend off a government ship from the Menagerie Coast, because it turns out, I guess you might know it, not at the moment, but you got on a pirate ship, which has their own really neat characters and stuff. But you fend them off so you can do some pirate combat, and then basically you just return to drop off the refugees to one of these port cities, and then the final dungeon is the actual sunken city, which they can just reuse the same map and sink it down. Ignore these. This is on the GM layer, also obviously all the map annotations, but these don't actually have anything to do with it. I think that's a holdover from the previous map. The bummer is the actual sunken island is not a dungeon. It's basically just this one encounter with this Sahuagin priestess who's just kind of has a vendetta against a bunch of surface dwellers and all that. So it's got some interesting components to it. It's just a little bit too simplistic for a cool start, but still a pretty neat way of introducing the coastal adventures. Dangerous Designs is might be my favorite one of the group. It starts with another cool inciting incident. You're in the gnomish town of Hupperduke, and your players are walking along the street, and all of a sudden this nearby klaxon's alarm blazing, and this escaped convict runs through the streets with a bunch of cloaked kobolds, and they have broken this person out of prison. And of course there's a scuffle there, but then the prisoner probably gets away. You have to track them down, and you follow them all the way to a hideout. Although you can do some investigation work too. Actually, you probably should do some investigation work first. There's a neat little bit of urban kind of tracking down, and you investigate the explosion and all that. And there's a lot of maps with this one too. There's somebody's house. There's the actual street map, which is nice that it actually gives you this encounter map. There's the kobold group on there, so that's pretty fun to have. That's probably why it's one of my favorites, because it's got some good maps. Here's the actual hideout that you track the escaped prisoner from, and then that leads to a steel door, which leads to basically a James Bond-esque villain inventor named Stalmast, who has a dungeon crawl at the end, and they're just a pissed off gnome inventor who is basically the mad science trope. They told me I couldn't do it and all this. So, and it's really kind of a funny level 2 version of a supervillain lair, which a bunch of kind of little traps and little kobold inventors everywhere. There's a really funny almost like Tomb of Horror style trap with a floor gives way and dumps players into a shark-infested pool. I thought that was really funny. So just a really enjoyable story, I think. And it's got an actual antagonist in it, unlike some of the other ones that can mock and berate you the whole time. So that's pretty fun. I like that one a lot. Dark designs. Next is Frozen Sick, which is the northern adventure, which you're tracking down. This one probably has the least. Yeah, in fact, it only has 2 maps, so it's got the least amount of maps. This one might have been my favorite had it had better maps. Graying Wildlands is where it takes place. This one has you investigating the death and then the sickness of a bunch of people in Palebank Village to the north, which is tied to this disease, which is on these vials that were recovered from Isocross, which is a neat little frozen area where this ancient city, domed city, crashed down, and everybody wants to explore and take all these artifacts from. And of course, it's a super dangerous area. And sure enough, somebody brought these objects back, and they're infected everybody with this horrible freezing sickness. And you need to first track all that down, and then you finally realize where they came from, and then that takes you back over to Isocross, and then eventually to the final dungeon, which you are given a cool map of the final dungeon, and it's a neat design. It reminds me a lot of The Thing, in terms of it's this ancient. It's this isolated laboratory in the frozen wastes, basically. Although in this case, it is literally an ancient laboratory with a bunch of like undead zombies wearing lab coats and a bunch of constructs and stuff. So a very cool idea for a level 2 dungeon. Just a really neat thematic design. It's actually partially in the water too, which is really cool. So it ends really well. I think it takes a while to get going, and unfortunately, it doesn't have maps for most of those, especially if it at least had a town map at the beginning, like Hupperduke does. This one might actually be my favorite, but it's a close number 2 just because it ends really strongly and has a really neat dungeon at the end. Then we get to Unwelcome Spirits, which is the Eastern Kryn Empire Joas Wastes one. Where's that one? Waste of Zoras. Shoras? Somebody's going to correct me in the comments. Please do. This one takes place on a Horizon back tortoise, which is Urzen, and has a really lame start where you're just given basically a mission, should you choose to accept it, to go search for a missing warlock of the tribe. A goblin warlock who does rituals out in the Brokevale Marsh near the I think they're the Brokevale mountain range or something that connects the Kryn Empire to the human empire over here. And it basically boils down to a hex crawl in the jungle, which I have mixed feelings on hex crawls in general. I do appreciate this map is very much a hex crawl map, which we don't actually see a whole lot of in Roll20 because obviously D&D is very grid based. But there's a lot of, encounters throughout this area. Probably too many, honestly. These hex crawls always go on for way longer than we ever want them to. There is another Horizon back turtle encounter, which is very cool. The one redeeming thing about this adventure, because otherwise it's pretty straightforward, is at the end when you can infiltrate this fort, there is a twist. So you're of course the warlock has been captured by the enemy and you have to go and get them back. But by having her ritual interrupted and by being literally tortured to death and then revived and then tortured to death again, has caused her patron to possess her body, and she becomes super powerful and like kills all the guards. So the story is kind of up in the air for DMs to decide, do they want players to catch her before she does that, or find her in the act of like killing all the guards and have to deal with her? Or one of them that I didn't like was like she tracks all the way back across the swamp, and you get to an empty fort, turn around, and just have to chase her back across the swamp. That one seemed really unfulfilling. So there's probably a way to make an interesting story out of that. But I thought that was an interesting twist, that the person you're going to go save turns out to essentially be the final boss. Although defeating her, of course, does revert her back to normal, and it can be a good ending in the end. But all 4 are very different from each other in terms of urban adventures versus dungeon crawls versus wilderness adventures. They're all very well written. They're very short, probably just a handful of sessions each. Don't look for obviously like Lost Mine of Phandelver size adventures. If you combined all 4, you probably still wouldn't quite get to Phandelver size, but you can't combine them because they literally all are level 1 to 2 adventures that take place in completely different regions of the world. So if you were looking to have some kind of bigger campaign, you're not going to get that here. And it's a source book. These rarely come with larger campaigns. I think the only one I know of that did was the Acquisitions Incorporated one, which ended up being probably my favorite campaign source book because it had such a good adventure in it that I loved. But this one, I do love all 4 of them, even if they are quite short. All right, I think it is time to go over my pros and cons for Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. Did I mention the token page? I've also got a token page here. This shows all the monsters, and you can see quite a few monsters. Not quite Monster Manual, but pretty damn close, which is impressive. All of these have their matching character sheets and tokens right on there. You can drag and drop, and all that shit works very, very well. All right, so pros and cons for Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. Pros is a huge list of Wildemount locations, rich with details and adventure hooks. That is Chapter 3 is just incredible. I was extremely impressed with how good all these, just the amount of content here is staggering. Like every single area had something interesting. It's like it's like that one chapter of Storm King's Thunder times like 4 or something. Just, you know, a ton of options and a ton of content for DMs to build stories out of and build a whole campaign world out of. Pro, excellent foursome of introductory adventures for different regions, themes, and factions. I was a big fan. Some of them I definitely liked more than others. If I were to rank them real quick, I would probably say Dark Designs, followed by Frozen Sick, and then probably Unwelcome Spirits, and then last Tides of Retribution. But all of them are pretty solid for sure. And then pros, it includes monster sheets and tokens found in any of the counters, numbering nearly 200 monsters. That is a huge bonus that we get all those monsters included. I am extremely happy and thrilled about that. Cons, there are no pre-generated level 1 PCs, which is a bummer. I always like to see that in source books whenever you're starting a new region. It's probably less needed here compared to like a Ravnica and Eberron, because those have much different denizens and can have different classes and things. And this one is really mostly just stuff, you know, from the player point of view, it's honestly still mostly the same things that you've seen in the years before from the player's handbook and from Volos and all that, which goes into my other major con, which is there are no new races and there's only 4 new sub races. It really is the Forgotten Realms, but with a different history and area. Now, I still think that's good enough, but the caveat is not a whole lot of new interesting content compared to the things that we've seen come out from a player point of view. Final verdict, Explorer's Guide to Wildemount features a land rich with history, laden with treasure, and brimming with adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.